This week in Stupid, the buffoon known as Sargon of Akkad, the champion of so-called free speech, who has repeatedly said feminists and black people need to shut up about identity politics and need to stop talking about their identity politics, has, to no surprise, come to the defense of the identity politics of the group known as the neo-Nazis. This same group that has been shooting and murdering Sikhs throughout the United States since 9/11/2001 and have kept up their murder sprees all the way up to this past year, and who have targeted and murdered other people of Indian descent throughout the US, who have repeatedly killed people in their rallies, and who openly advocate genocide in public speeches. This is what Sargon feels is worth advocating on behalf of. This is very telling, considering he accused Black Lives Matter repeatedly of being a black supremacist group based on anecdotes and said they needed to be stopped. But Sargon is now openly supportive of a domestic terrorist group that continues to kill people who advocate for racial equality or who are killing people simply for being ethnic minorities in the United States. And it should be asked, why did he draw the line here? He claims to despise so-called feminazis, and then he supports self-described Nazis, who make it very clear that they want to kill people in their rallies. He disparages women and black people for stupid comments made in rallies, but now is actively supporting a group that chanted the death of Jewish people in their marches and gave standing ovations to the declarations of killing black people. He advocates on behalf of a group that does actively injure and kill people throughout the US, celebrates these murder sprees as triumphs and gains to their cause, and does so on a basis of identity politics. So Sargon bases his objections of feminism and Black Lives Matter on identity politics, and says they shouldn't talk, they have no right to, they aren't being fair, and then supports neo-Nazis who do exactly what he was disparaging those two groups of being, a identity politics motivated hate group that seeks to kill everything different to it. He claims that feminists and Black Lives Matter shouldn't have the same fundamental right, that they shouldn't speak out for their identity politics. But apparently neo-Nazis get a free pass. This video would make one think that Sargon clearly doesn't understand freedom of speech, but the truth is that he knows better. He knows that freedom of speech in the US just means that the US government can't forbid or penalize you based on your speech, your right to assembly, or your right to publicize content. Only a moron wouldn't know that businesses like hosting sites aren't the government and are free to discard anyone they don't want on their platforms because it's a capitalist market and each individual business is allowed to pursue their own policies within the framework of the law. If they don't want certain content to represent them or negatively impact their business, they have every right to discard it. Just like how Twitter rightfully discarded Sargon for repeatedly breaking their rules and posting uncensored, unfiltered gay porn. He's made videos in defense of capitalism before, so he knows this has to be a fact about US law in particular. He claims to do the research, after all. Freedom of speech has been a go-to defense for his beliefs. So why is he trying to lie and violate the freedom of speech of these companies that don't want neo-Nazi content to be affiliated with them? He repeatedly advocated for the silencing of the First Amendment rights of feminists and advocates of Black Lives Matter. So unfettered freedom of speech, isn't it? There's no rational reason for him to be lying to his viewers like this. The only logical explanation is that Sargon really does believe in and support the neo-Nazis. Why else draw the line in defense of them, a group he supposedly hates, but not for black people or feminists that he disagrees with? Why go so far as to say these other groups shouldn't be allowed to express their constitutional rights, and then argue that neo-Nazis should be allowed to violate the constitutional rights of businesses throughout the US, to spread more hate speech and to continue to advocate for more murders that are continuing to increase every year as they gain a greater presence? And they're gaining a greater presence largely in part thanks to Sargon himself. They've been gaining traction for years, and Sargon doesn't seem to care about what his contributions have been. Sorry, but the evidence is only pointing one way. Sargon is showing far too much neo-Nazi proclivities. It's not that he lacks self-awareness, as some of his erstwhile fans say. He genuinely supports neo-Nazis, but tries to make it as tacit as possible to gain a greater amount of credibility for his platform. And to my personal disgust, Sargon bastardized a quote from Martin Niemöller. And apologies for mispronouncing that name. Now, Martin Niemöller was a concentration camp survivor who spent his life explaining the shame of being silent about Nazism and the shame for supporting Adolf Hitler in particular. Sargon bastardized his quote while explicitly trying to defend Nazism. That had to be the most disgusting and shameful act of his that I've seen so far. It was also one of the most blatant acts of anti-Semitism. That quote was in defense of marginalized groups, especially Jewish people. And to see him twist that around to defend Nazis shows a complete lack of concern, care, and sensitivity for Holocaust victims, and it is a downright insult. That was just disgusting. Lastly, it should be blatantly obvious that Sargon no longer makes any sense in his arguments. This neo-Nazi apologist, and that is exactly what he has become and what he has declared himself to be, claims to be a proponent of free speech, but evidently he doesn't want Black Lives Matter and feminists to have those rights. He repeatedly says that they need to shut up and stop talking. And now he's arguing in favor of neo-Nazis who have actively killed people and whose most recent violence in Charlottesville was deemed an act of terrorism by the U.S. Congress and, surprisingly, by President Donald Trump. This is what Sargon is defending. Recognized terrorism by the U.S. government, and he uses free speech as an excuse to advocate on behalf of terrorists who actively make it their mission to kill people, and who have made no secret about their desire to kill people, and who continue to kill people to a higher degree than any time in contemporary U.S. history. This is what his 3,413 patrons and his $8,063 a month of monthly contributions go to now. Support for a group that is recognized as a domestic terrorist threat by the U.S. government. Keep that in mind. These people, his fans, are willing to upload videos about violating the freedom of speech of business organizations so that the spreading of terrorism and hate speech throughout the U.S. can continue unfettered. That's the kind of person that Sargon is. That's the kind of person people need to recognize that Sargon is, and that's the kind of followers he has. Terrorist apologists, terrorist sympathizers, and people who try to equate this small, stupid group of violent people called Antifa to neo-Nazis, people who literally kill others and celebrate it. That's insane. They try to draw a false equivalence, and it is absolutely disgusting. But hey, that's Sargon. Unfettered, unfiltered, unapologetic, and always defending white supremacist groups while claiming to be non-identitarian, because evidently his fans aren't intelligent enough to see the glaring self-contradiction and vast stupidity of that point, because it self-contradicts on even the most basic level. But hey, oh well. Stupid is as stupid does.